Hey everybody, welcome in to the panel of the Power of Words, or Words of Power. Words of Power is the official title. My name is Kemy Joseph. Then we have...
Alright, I'm Owen McKenna.
And I'm Evan Greer.
And those are a little bit of our names, right? We could represent so much more in our introductions, but this will be a co-collaborative conversation with you all here. So one of the first things we wanted to know as we have a conversation around navigating institutional oppression and reclaiming words, one of the core pieces of how do we know when a word is reclaimed? Who decides that? We don't decide that. We'll just say that right now. We're not the definitive source of any of that. Each one of us has an impact on that. So part of this conversation will be our individual navigating of institutionalized systems and how we're contributing to that, as well as how we can reclaim the words that have impacted us and support people in reclaiming those words for themselves. So if you're with that, let's go. Let's practice some snaps here. Awesome. It's always important to really start with understanding what we're here for and what we kind of won't be talking about. So we're very interested to hear from you all what drew you to this conversation. So whether you're talking to someone who's a new friend or an old friend that you came to the stage with, we'd love to just have you turn to someone next to you, say hello, give them your fair name or your real name, whatever you want, and just share a little bit about what drew you to this conversation, and we'll share our perspective as well. So we'll just do that for a couple of moments. Chat with someone next to you. What drew you to this conversation? So we're asking, what drew you to this conversation? We got a long mic so we can hear from a few of you. All right, so clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you're awesome. Clap 0 times if you're ready for a great conversation. So let's hear a little bit about what drew you to this conversation, then we'll hear from our panelists. What drew you to this conversation? Any brave volunteer want to share what drew you to this conversation? I knew you as a speaker, and I'm always keen to hear what you have to say. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
I think I have an understanding of the issues we're hearing and talking about. But it's my voice and my experience that understands that, and I want to hear other voices to inform that.
I want to hear other voices to inform my understanding of these experiences. What else we got? There you go.
Yeah, so FAIR can be pretty white, cis, het, and I've been having a lot of experiences of people being really worried when they hear certain words being used by people of different communities, and a lot of tension around that, so that's what brought me here.
So thank you. And you also brought up a couple of words. So most of us understand what white means. Would you be able to break down what cis and het mean?
Sure. So cis is that your gender matches the sex assigned at birth. So like sometimes people like to say hearts and hearts match. And het, we're just talking about, heterosexual, so not queer or on the LGBTQIA spectrum.
Thank you. Part of sharing the power of words, making sure we have a shared meaning of those words that we're starting to use. So thank you for that. Any other reasons from this side of the room? What drew you to this conversation? All right, we'll turn to our panelists. What drew you all to this conversation?
So yeah, hey, again, my name's Evan Greer. I use she or they pronouns. It's my first fair, so thanks so much for having me. What drew me to this conversation is Leah asked me to be part of it, but what draws me to the importance of this conversation is when we are in community, like the community that I'm beginning to understand here, part of that is language, and we recognize that language has power, and that the power of language is not divorced from the power structures in our society. Words do not happen in a vacuum. And so recognizing that words can cause enormous harm and enormous joy, and that they have tremendous power. And so particularly, and I will get into it in a little bit, but I'm here to speak from my own experience as a trans and queer person about the word queer. which is a reclaimed term, and I can talk a little bit about the history of it, but perhaps through exploring the way that our community has reclaimed a word that was used to attack us, we can begin to understand how other communities have done the same, or how we continue to grapple with the complexities of that, because even many within our community, we're not a monolith and don't always agree on what words mean, what words are helpful, what words are harmful. And so just starting this conversation here today, hopefully we can come to a better understanding of the power that words have and how to use them for good and not for evil.
Awesome, let's go.
So I'm a kid. I'm under 18, and so a lot of people don't listen to like youth voices, which is a really important thing to have in all of these conversations, because we are the next generation and we're going to be handling the whole world soon. And so I'm here to help adults see youth struggles and help other youth also see youth struggles, to be honest.
Let's go. Remember when we were the future at some point? Now we're the present, we're like, dang. So let's hopefully help. Let's help the youth do a better job than we did, starting with us doing a better job than the folks who came before us. So my name is Kemy again. What drew me to this conversation is also Leah, helping to bring this panel together. It's also for the folks who are not here. And there was some controversy that inspired this. I'm not going to get into that because I don't know all the details. I'm speaking of the power of words. I don't generally speak about things secondhand that are brought to me because there's so much in between that I don't know about, so I don't want to misrepresent what's happening. What I will say is my experience at FAIR has overall been very incredible. I've also conceived ways I've been absolutely tokenized, and so when I speak about words that impact me, it's different than words that impact all of you. And that was the point of this conversation for me. As soon as they asked me to be a part of the panel, I was like, all right, cool, we're going to reclaim words. Even before we get to words like the N-word, there's a lot of words in between that people are still misusing, and if we can't even talk about those that are a little bit more approachable, we're never going to get to the ones that people are like, oh, we got to talk about that right now. It's like, I don't know you like that. So especially in a room right here where we are having people come in and out of conversations and we're all dealing with different kind of levels of trauma, different levels of excitement, my goal is to do more healing than harm. I love what we just talked about of community and the power of words. Healing happens in community and community happens with healing, but community can also bring lots of harm as we've experienced. So I appreciate y'all taking a moment out of your day to be able to take some tools that you can leave to do more healing than harm, right? So can we get just a nod of healing if you're like, yeah, I would like some more healing. Yeah, if I can get some of that. So with that being said, as we were having this conversation, I think the most important thing that we grounded on yesterday was we don't have a global answer to this, meaning that, for example, Evan said, that minorities are not a monolith. So me as one black person cannot be like, here's what to say in front of all black people, because now even we're called BIPOC. I'm like, I never agreed to that, but I'm one of them, I guess. So I'm just letting you know that not everybody is on the same page with terminology. So part of navigating that is staying open to more and more voices. Being able to understand who it's okay and how you're building your relationship. So that's why I asked you to introduce yourself, because this is also a relationship building experience, to make sure that when we leave here, we can feel safer. Part of that feeling safer is knowing more faces, knowing people that you can see and connect with. So can I get a yay, yay if you're with that? Yay. All right, we're rolling. So with that being said, you want to start with, Evan has a great perspective on the word. I'm gonna call all the slur words by their first initial, just to give them all the same respect. So we're gonna talk about the Q word, because I'm not gonna use the Q word. We'll leave Evan to use the Q word, because Evan has reclaimed it, yeah?
Because I'm a big old queer. So, like I said, I'm gonna talk just briefly about kind of the history of this word. But first I'll talk about why. Because even now today, within the broader LGBTQIA plus community, I have had conflict, particularly with older members of the community, who feel very strongly that using the word queer is still harmful. And I've heard people tell me, like that's the last word many of us heard for a long time, when there was tremendous violence, which continues today, of course, just not at the same degree. But what I think is so important is just to recognize that language changes over time, and the meaning of words changes over time. And we all know that sort of intuitively. There are lots of words that didn't even exist not that long ago. You didn't used to Google anything, right? But we now have words that emerge and words that change their meaning over time. The word queer, according to my very hasty Wikipedia research just before getting up here, supposedly originated in the 16th century, the 1500s, and means sort of what we traditionally thought of it to mean: odd, different, unusual, and had sort of a bit of a sinister connotation too, like a little suspect. Sort of like queer was sort of like you're a little sus, essentially. The first kind of alleged recorded use of the word queer to refer to homosexuals was in England in the 1600s, and it actually wasn't particularly derogatory. It really initially was more of just sort of acknowledgement, which was actually very powerful at the time because there were not words for us for a long time. We had our own words. We've always been here. But in many Romance languages, anyway, there simply was not a word for gay. And part of that was kind of about invisibilizing our community. Part of it was also about the fact that we always did have a place within almost every society. It just wasn't necessarily always spoken about in the same way that we think about it today. So it's very difficult to historicize queerness because we just played a very different role in community, particularly in indigenous cultures on this continent, but that's true globally around the world from what little we know about those kind of early queer communities. But what's interesting is that there's records of as early as the 1700s, folks using the term queer self-referentially. And so while it did take off as a slur and was weaponized and used to attack us and essentially say, like, you are different and therefore bad, there is evidence that even, again, as long as 400 years ago, people were saying, I'm a queer, we are queers. And part of that was about acknowledging the difference and celebrating it and saying, yeah, F you. Like, we are odd, we are different. We don't want whatever you all have. We're not trying to become like you. We are our own thing. And to me, that is the power of the word queer, and that's what it still means to me today. I actually struggle, and this is now because I'm becoming a queer of a certain age, and and this is I think what we're talking about in terms of needing to listen to youth. I feel that we've perhaps even gone too far, and that queer as an umbrella term for the entire LGBTQIA++++ community, for me, it actually takes away from the power that queer took on in the 70s, when it specifically was referring to an anti-capitalist, anti-racist, and anti-imperialist movement that recognized that heterosexism was born out of colonialism and patriarchy. And so for me, queer is about resistance to those systems of oppression, and not just who you make out with. But that said, I'm the old stodgy one here, and the reality is that queer has become an umbrella term, and I think that that's probably fine, even though I'm grumpy about it. And it is useful as a term to self-identify so that we can find community and support. So I'll pause there and pass it back, and feel free to jump in. But there's a very brief history of the word queer and why our community has reclaimed it, and why perhaps there's still tension about how it should be used and who can and should use it.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. As we spoke yesterday, we're not going to give you a history of every single word. Right? We can be here for the whole time. But just loving this conversation of how a word can be used to first give recognition, to say, hey, I can even see myself. I can find other people who relate, right? This is where we start using words to even try to relate and connect. And then a place where the world can then become derogatory, hateful, harmful, the last thing you hear before you die. And then there's even times where laws are put in place to say we're going to prevent this word from being used or no longer being so used. And then there's sometimes a space. We were talking about this yesterday. Sometimes a space where the word is no longer used as harmfully or as presently, so then it can be reclaimed by a group. Doesn't mean the negativity, the evil part of it went away. It just means there's more space given to the group who said, wait, I can actually use this to find people who relate to me, who relate to the culture around the word. Even changing an ER to an A in a word says, hey, our culture, this is us taking this word. What's interesting is there still has to be that space. So part of that reclaiming is also the releasing. What words are we using that are derogatory that we need to release in order for a group to actually take it back and use it the way they want to use it? And part of the reason I'm framing that is for you all as individuals out there to be thinking about what words may you have grown up with that you have let yourself release at this point in your life. You don't have to share the word, right? We're not gonna, people are like, damn, you're gonna get like, no, you don't have to share the word. The learning, the thought process behind releasing the word can still be applied to other slurs, but it starts with us being able to release that. So I just want you to think for a moment, any terms that you may have used in a derogatory way or that you were using in an affectionate way but found out that it was derogatory, like, oh crap, I can't say blank. For me, I hate being told what to do. Someone tells me I can't say something, I'm like, oh, you best believe I'm gonna start saying it. But if I say I don't wanna say it anymore because I wanna support another group having healing, friendship, community, that's a different release for me. But that was my own process. So I'll be interested to hear from you all. Again, you don't have to share the words you're thinking of. Think about your word, be sad for a moment, and then focus on what helped you release any words that you're no longer using in a derogatory or negative way. So you can share that with a person next to you, maybe even a different person, anyone you feel comfortable. Again, not the word, just your process for releasing words that no longer serve you. Go for it. Any words, we'll just call them words that no longer serve you. Let's go for it back here.
Well, I was corrected by my daughter. I listened to the youth as a recommendation for me. You grow up with words that are just used in your family and you get used to them. So listening to the youth and having them help you understand how words are being used now.
That's me. Listening to the youth, listening to other folks who are telling you how words are being used now, and being willing to hear that, right? Some of us, I don't know how many of you had the experience where you're like, oh, it's not how I meant to say it. Is that really listening or is that defending? At least for me, that feels like I'm defending. And it sucks when you feel like you've been called out on something, and when we can actually listen to the reasons behind it, it's easier to then feel more willing to release. Can we have one more person to share? I'm still looking at this sign over here. I'll come back to y'all.
Just how it makes the other person feel. If they tell me they don't want me to use that word, then I'm going to not use that word.
And so the other person, how the other person feels, which requires us to want to like the person and help them feel good, right? Otherwise, some people tell us stuff, we're like, screw you, I don't care how you feel. That's still allowing people to be othered. To me, the relational piece is the more we actually have a relationship. If somebody said, hey, I don't want you to call me that, I'm like, I care about that person. Even if I don't know all the people that they represent, that person is an inspiration to do it. So thank you. And there's one more hand back here.
So I have a situation where my child changed gender, probably at the age of 18. And so when I think of him as a young kid, I always went backpacking with my son. And if I say that in front of him, he gets upset. And it's so hard for me to, when I speak to him now, I'll introduce him as my daughter. I'll tell somebody, my son is gay or transgender or whatever, but it's very hard to separate the memories that I had. And I'm not trying to hurt anybody, but it's just the way it comes out. And then I get slapped a little bit sometimes, and it's a difficult situation.
Learning is difficult. Anybody else relate? Learning is difficult sometimes. Let me ask you a question. This is for everyone. How do you celebrate the change? So when you get it right, is there any kind of celebration of like, hey, Pop, thanks for getting it right?
Occasionally I'll get a shake of the head, but there's
So occasionally you get a shake of the
no
head?
shake of the head or, just a look. I appreciate that, but there's no thank you or, and I'm not looking for that. I'm just also looking for the forgiveness of the other half of my brain, which is so ingrained, and it's hard to juxtapose to it sometimes.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Because this conversation of, the reason I say this, so I have a degree in brain-based teaching and learning. And this is learning, so intolerance, hate, discrimination, very traumatizing, let's just call it inconvenient, deadly. It's so hard, but learning can't be that way. That's the hardest part. Is if we actually want to shift into a place of learning that requires us to do something different, and sometimes, as you said, it requires a little bit of forgiveness from other folks, but that it requires the relationship to be the bridge, right? Because you can't ask a group who's been oppressed to also be the one to provide your healing and your education, right? So, but in a family relationship, sometimes that person is the bridge. The piece, though, is there's so many more words to express what we actually want to say sometimes. A lot of us haven't paused to say, what other words would I like to use instead? If any of you have ever learned, English is actually my second language. So Creole, Haitian Creole is my first language. When I was learning English, I wasn't getting punished for saying words wrong. I was getting celebrated when I got words right. And I was transitioning, but how often are we doing that? Most of us are not actually setting up the spaces for that. FAIR is an amazing environment where we actually have now sanctuaries and places that are going to celebrate a new uses of terminology. That's how we start to put power back in better words, is by moving along and celebrating that. I'd love to have you share a little bit of what you were mentioning earlier about folks kind of testing words and your version of releasing terms that no longer serve you.
So people my age, they're like middle schoolers, so what is that, 11, 12, 13, 14? Those younger teens.
Wait, how old are you real quick?
13.
Okay, so you're right there. Okay, you're in it.
Yep.
You're in the mix.
So at like school and stuff, a lot of people don't know what is too far. So people my age will like test out saying slurs to different people, which is really hurtful. And even though they don't know how hurtful, it still is a really big problem.
And thank you for sharing that. You were mentioning even around the word, we'll call it, it's funny if I say the C word, y'all think of one version, we're talking about another version. What's the C word that you told me earlier?
So, it's crazy.
Yeah, get your minds out of the gutter, right? So talking about, you mentioned a moment ago of using that term and now looking at the mental health kind of implications, how that's been shifting it for you.
Yeah, I think that word is used for a lot of things that it should not be used for. So like people will see something and they'll be like, oh man, that's crazy, or that person's so crazy, which using that word isn't exactly a slur, but it's still hurtful, is what I've had to learn over the years. And the past couple of years, I've had really serious mental health stuff going on. And so that hurt has, like, I've had a personal experience with that.
I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes it's when we have the personal experience is when we're willing to shift it. This is why it's interesting when you look at tragedies in the world, when it's kind of a big thing. You're like, oh, that's so difficult, that's so hard. When it's like, oh, one person or a person that you know, someone in your community, you're like, oh wait, this affects me. why do we have to wait for that? That is one of the hardest questions, even for myself. I still find myself at times where I can unsubscribe from things. That's a place of privilege, being able to unsubscribe from other people's hurt. And like, I'm just gonna focus on me right now. Then it's in your life, in your face, and it's harder to say, dang it, I wish I would have done something sooner. I wish I would have done something different to be able to be more prepared for that. And as we transition into this next portion, I love what you said back there about habit. Everybody do me a favor, cross your arm for me. Just cross your arms. Cross your arms. Cross your arms. And so when you cross your arms, I want you to pay attention to which arm is on top. Which arm is on top. Also, pay attention to whether or not you're tucking your hands. Some of you just realize you're tuckers. You're like, oh crap, it got me. So some people tuck their hands, some people leave them on top. Either way, it's fine. It's fine. So now what I want you to do is take a moment to uncross your arms and then cross them with the other arm on top. So there, I'll show you a trick. So, I love it. People are like, wait, how do you even do it? You can do this up here too. So first, cross back to your regular way. Right, cross back to your regular way. Then you can take one hand out. Take the hand that was on top. Right? Tuck it around. There you go. We got. So you have a new arm configuration. Yeah. So people are like learning to walk again. Yeah, for sure. So just hold this for a moment. Just hold it for a moment in a new configuration and just feel what that feels like. Nod your head if it feels a little uncomfortable. Like keep nodding your head if it's like intolerable. You're like, I can't even do it. I can't focus on what you're saying. So this is interesting. When did you just, some of y'all already like released. Look at that. People are like, I gotta get out of this. That's privilege. Oh, it's uncomfortable. I can get out of it. For some folks, it's uncomfortable and they can't escape it. It's not as simple as just shifting. But when we keep this metaphor going, what's important is most of us will say that this way, the original way that we did it was the most comfortable. My question is, when did you decide that was the way to do it? So no one remembers like your third birthday and you like blew out your candles and you step back and like, yeah, this is the way I'm gonna live forever. What's interesting, most of us don't remember when we decided that blank, blank, blank word is the word that we're going to use to describe this act, this part of our lives, that person, this group of people. But when we're called out on it, we're like all of a sudden like, don't tell me how I've been doing this is wrong. Like, I'm not sure if you can raise your hand who'd like to be told that you're wrong. Yeah, someone's like, no, that's just like passing by. No, don't know what you're talking about, but I don't want to be there either. So I hear you, absolutely. So if most of us don't want to have that feeling, we can resist someone even inviting us to try something else differently. But if your life depended on it, you would figure out how to cross your arms a different way. Other people's lives depend on us figuring out how to speak a different way. So sometimes we feel like, dang it, it's very inconvenient for us to change our vocabulary because we can step out of this discomfort very quickly. Some people are living in that discomfort every single day. And by us simply changing some of our vocabulary, they feel like, oh wow, I can relax here. I can uncross my arms. I can actually breathe here. That's the power that we can give as we release something to then allow it to be reclaimed. So this brings us back to what you were saying. What helped you reclaim the key word for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, by the time I came along, it was already pretty well done and reclaimed. But I was going to actually speak of something else briefly on that. And yeah, similarly, crazy has been one that's been working on for myself. I was super interested to learn that during the Deaf President Now movement at Gallaudet University, where deaf students and faculty essentially fought really hard to get a deaf president of a deaf university, that there was really an interesting debate within the organizers around whether to use the term deaf or hard of hearing, And there was like the kind of like young, more radical folks were like, no, we're not fucking hard of hearing. Like we are deaf and dumb, and like fuck you. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to curse. But I, similarly, I just recognize the power in that. But that's been what dumb has been one for me that I've been working on training out of my vocabulary, because it literally means someone who can't speak. And there are people who self-identify as dumb, but like the band Nickelback is a bad band, not a dumb band. Is one I'm working on, right?
But you give very clear examples.
Thank you. But what I wanted to say, or to put kind of a bit of a finer, the crossing arms thing is so beautiful and perfect. But I'm gonna be like the mean lady up here for a second and just be like, it wasn't that long ago that there were a lot of white people being like, what? I can't use the N-word anymore? Like, what the hell? Like, why are you trying to police my language or whatever? Do you want to be one of those people? If someone's telling you that a word that you're using is hurting them and hurting their community, do you want to be the modern version of like a white person in the 60s being like, I don't want to stop using this word? No, I don't think you do. So hold on to that.
Some people do, though. I mean, I've talked to enough people. This is what I love about these conversations is that it really comes down to what inspires you to actually change. So we can kind of go to the far line is then like the reforcing of other people to shift the language. For me, there's a very challenging part of that in the equity conversation. If I start bulldozing you on how to speak, then I become the oppressor. I don't know about you, but I've lived like as the oppressor and the oppressed, and it's trying to figure out how do I break the cycle of both of those, because I'm not gonna be like, I'm gonna oppress myself so you can be free. No. It's not how I wanna live either. I wanna live towards a place of saying, okay, I hear what you're saying, because there's still terms for me that I say up here that don't have to come out here. And I'm working on translating that. So that's where I'm like, I have the empathy. There's so many more words. And even for me, like with gender pronouns, I'm still learning. I'm like, I'd rather just learn someone's name because I'm just gonna keep saying their name. And I struggle with gender pronouns, but I'm finding my way to say, how do I honor the request that this person's asking me for? Because even if I can't do exactly what they're asking, what's my version of that? What's my version? That at least helps me feel like I can do what someone's asking without having to, knowing that things are changing so fast. And for one person it's different from another person. For another person it's like, cool, if I want to be in community with you, how can we have invitational opportunities to talk about what would help us feel most comfortable? This is a great example of that. You all just kind of rolling in here, we're sitting down talking. We didn't start at the N-word, right? We're here now. We didn't start there. Some of us are just starting at the hardest parts of the conversation without even saying freaking hello. What are we doing? If we're talking about the power of words that allow us to then talk about powerful words, we have to start with the words that allow us to connect. So what I want you to do for me right now, think about a word that you are working on removing from your vocabulary. And I want you to think about at least 5 other words that are more acceptable to say. Think about a word you're trying to remove out of your vocabulary and challenge yourself to think about 5 other words. 5 other words that could be useful. There's a lot of words out there. You can even make one up because like it's hard for someone to get offended by a word you just made up, right? Just like, so think about think about a word that you're trying to release. And we haven't practiced this part, so I'm challenging us too up here. Thinking about, so if we were talking about the word, you said crazy. I've used that so much. The word that comes next is, that's so insane. It's like, well, that's still there. What other words have y'all come up with for the word crazy instead?
So for me, I realize that I often use it just as a to mean like something is a lot. Like, oh, that's like crazy good food or whatever. So that's really is a good.
Yeah, really is that
but
food?
Then wild is something. Oh, that was wild.
That's my go-to.
That was
wild.
a crazy party, wild party.
That party was a lot. It was wild. That person is a lot. Is wild, right? So it works. So that's still only 2 words, though, right? We're seeing the challenge here. Interesting, and now you're giving us words, Greg. Interesting. That was interesting, but it's like interesting because people can say that was interesting, and you're like, yeah, it means a lot, even in that pause. That was Interesting. That was unusual. It's not unusual to be. Yeah, right? Unusual. That was unusual. That was wild. That was interesting. We're saying kind of like, that was, maybe out of my norm, right? Because if we look at even crazy, it's based on even our own norms. Do you have another word that comes to mind for you so we can get to?
I mean, you can say peculiar if you're using it to add somebody, you can be like, man, that person's peculiar.
That person's peculiar. And then you put on your monocle and you go about your day, right? Like that. It's pretty fire. But to me, this is already the fact that we can even brainstorm alternatives is the point. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to brainstorm alternatives that if someone called me peculiar, I'll still be like, we gotta have a follow-up on this, but I'm gonna be less offended, that's for sure. Promise you that. So it'd be interesting, just in your own mind, just for a moment, think about any word that you're trying to release, and what are some alternatives? And that'd be interesting for you to share with someone next to you, just the alternative words without telling them the root word that you're working on. Just what are some alternative words? And just see how that conversation goes, right? So if you're trying to release some words, some terminology, think about alternatives and share that with the person next to you, a person next to you, or a group next to you. And I'd love to just hear some people share just their alternative words without the root word, just alternatives. Go for it. So is there any other words that you're working on?
That's your root word, or that's the word you're going to use?
Clap once if you can hear me. Clap 4 times if you're phenomenal. 4. All right, I would love to hear some folks' alternative words. Again, don't share your root words. Don't be like, I'm trying to change this one, because then people are going to look at you strange. Do that somewhere else. Alternative words, what do you got? Unique. So, yeah, person's unique. You're all unique, right? That's great, solid. What else? We're all unique. What else? Alternative words. the classic look away. And then the volunteering other people. What? Absurd. I'll take it. So again, we don't have to know the root word. So we were talking up here on stage. For me, pronouns, gender pronouns, I've been figuring out what other words to use to refer to a group, right? So usually I'll go with folks, y'all. One of my clients was like, well, I feel weird saying y'all. I'm like, yeah, you feel weird saying y'all, but the amount of people who feel excluded when you just say you guys, what if we just, like, y'all's just one term. Team, group, crew. Any other ones we came up with up here?
Assembled mortals.
Assembled mortals, humans, right? Spirits, hey, spirits. Come on, everybody come on back, spirits, right? I would even pay more attention if someone called me a spirit, right? So the idea of, this is part of when we're talking about little tools of what helps you navigate this. So I'm gonna share the flip version of this. When I've done a lot of work with bias, and so if somebody says something to me, my filter, especially if they say, oh crap, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to say it that way. I'm like, okay, let me figure out 5 ways that I can interpret what they said. The first one, 5 ways besides the first one, which might be, hey, this person's racist. If that's the only interpretation I'm willing to stay on, what other wiggle room do I even have to relate to this person? If I can challenge myself to come up with 5 other alternative ways to hear this person, to actually relate back to this person, I'm more likely to want to build a relationship with them. There are people who I don't care at all about doing that with, and they are over there. Folks who I want in my life, I'm willing to spend the time figuring out other ways to hear them, to relate, and to understand that person. That's just for me. So when we're talking about, this is a very individualized process. Yes, we can start to shift institutions, but an institution is built by individuals. So part of this is helping to retool our mind with new tools in order to pass them on to other folks who will listen to us because we have those relationships. So Evan, you were mentioning a little bit about a word that you wanted to shift, and can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I was, when we were thinking about it, another one I'm trying to train myself off of is sucks. Like, that sucks sort of originates from demeaning queer sex, essentially. But there's like nothing that quite like hits as hard as it. Like, that sucks. So just working on alternatives there. But I wanted to touch on the point that you just made about relationship, because I think that that's so important. And for me, there's just, you know, when my dad misgenders me, I know my dad loves me and cares about me and isn't trying to hurt me. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but it is different than when like right-wing trolls on the internet misgender me on purpose to harm me. It feels different. It actually feels worse in a way because I don't really care about what right-wing trolls on the internet think. But you know, there's a relationship there, and that's powerful and important. In the same way, you know, like my best friend in the world is Puerto Rican. We have the type of relationship where like I might make a joke with her about like something in her life that she would like say is a Puerto Rican stereotype. I would not make that joke to a random person I don't know, because we don't have that relationship. But we have the relationship where I would know if I crossed the line, she would tell me, and that, you know, we have that relationship where we can perhaps push it a little bit more than we might. And she could do the same with me around gender stuff or something else. But so I think that's so important to just recognize that when you don't have relationship, or perhaps words could be preventing you from forming relationship, or getting to the place where you could ask or receive support in changing how your language impacts other people. So a little bit of a roundabout thought there. But.
No, solid. I think it's part of the reason because we keep talking about that there's a difference between intention and impact. And most people have heard that, right? Like, oh, that wasn't what I intended. And the people say assume positive intent. I'm like, it's a lot of effort to assume positive intent for someone who you don't have a relationship with, for sure. But so we have intention and we have impact, but what's in the middle is these exceptions. And you outlined one. Hey, between my friend, I can say this joke that I would never say anywhere else, but we're fine. That's an exception. That's kind of screwing us up. Not screwing us up on an individual level because we can have those conversations, but then someone's like, oh, but you said that's that person's like, we have a relationship that allows that to be fine. Sometimes we forget the context that we're in and we say something that someone else has made an exception for us in our personal lives, but then now we're bringing it to a community experience and it is not the same. And those exceptions don't change what other people have heard and how it's impacted them. So I think as we talk about the gap between impact or intention and impact, it's really, we have to think about where have we tried to make exceptions in our lives? Who has given us exceptions? Like, we can appreciate those folks. Just be careful about how are we trying to apply that globally? That's a different version of making a stereotype. Oh, I can say this, I have black friends. So if you say, and I have blank friends, you're probably trying to apply an exception from your friend group to a group of people who are not your friends in that same way. So just knowing that that's something that keeps tripping us up. As we start to wrap this up, I'd love to pass to you if there's anything else you want to share, and then we'll have time for like 1 or 2 questions before we close out. Yeah, I got you. I know we've been talking a lot. I want to make sure.
So I think the last thing I would say is, like, in communities such as the LGBT or BIPOC or whatever you want to call. Oh, yeah. A lot of people are really immature about like how oppressed they are. So I've experienced a lot of different people in their own communities fighting for who can say which slurs and how bad of a life they've had like it's a good thing, which it's not. It's not something, that's not something that you want to fight about because I'm better because I had a worse life, you know? It's just really childish for adults to be doing this still.
Another version of that is called the Oppression Olympics. Right? Who has had it worse? And I often try to encourage people not to think that way. It's just some people also feel like their oppression still hasn't been acknowledged. So there's a portion of that of like, hey, if you have someone saying, oh, I had it worse, maybe ask, so what else needs to be acknowledged for you so that you can release it go? Because sometimes we're holding on to oppression as a badge of honor, and that also instills in us like, oh, it's okay for other people to be oppressed a little bit because I had it bad. So it's okay for the other person, like, oh, kids these days is a great example. Kids these days are so soft, so do you want kids to be like smacked and beat like we were? Straight up. For me, it's like, no, I don't want that. I would love to find a different way. But if we keep holding on to like, I made it through, they have to make it through. It's like, no, I made it through, so I want it to be a little easier for folks so they don't have to deal with the same